Good evening, and welcome to the third in the series of Poetry in the LexIcon readings. My name is Rosamund Taylor. Welcome to Manuela Moser, Padraig Regan, and Sexton, and thank you for coming. I'd also like to thank Marion Keyes at the library for all her help in facilitating this reading. I was delighted that so many of you came to the last reading, and I think you will enjoy this one just as much. Today we are showcasing work by some of Northern Ireland's most exciting new writers, whose skillful, image-rich poetry pushes boundaries. When deciding who to invite, I was aware of a wealth of different writers currently active in Northern Ireland. Ultimately, I chose Manuela, Padraig, and Stephen because I have been following their work for a long time, admire them all, and think that their voices will complement one another. Before each poet reads, I will introduce them to you briefly. Then they will read for around 15 minutes. Afterwards, we'll discuss their work together. So first up, we have Manuela. I first became aware of Manuela Moser's writing when we both read at the Cork International Poetry Festival at an event for new writers. I really admire the precision and depth of her poems. As poets, we often try to capture the uniqueness of the things we are looking at, and Manuela is exceptionally skilled at this. Her wry style always draws me into her work, and then I'm surprised by the emotional punch she delivers. Manuela Moser's poetry has appeared in The Stinging Fly, Poetry Ireland Review, Hotel, Copper Nickel, and The Tangerine. She is currently Publishing Fellow at the Seamus Heaney Centre, having recently received her PhD in Creative Writing, Poetry, and she runs the Lifeboat Press. She is also the 2020 recipient of the Ireland Chair of Poetry Travel Award, which will enable her to travel by boat and train to Berlin and retrace the journey that her Jewish grandfather, his brother, and their parents made in 1936 to escape Nazi Germany. I'm really looking forward to hear her read. Please go ahead, Manuela. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rosamund. That's so lovely of you. Okay, I'm going to start with some poems. I've kind of got two sequences and then a few poems in the middle. Okay,
great.
I'll start. For example, nevertheless, there was terror. We are back in the same familiar place, and my brother has turned from a tiger into a boy, and yet for the first time ever, he is not a tiger, and we play with a ball of string. The forests are damp with mist, and I am watching birds dive into the muddy sand to find worms, and they're chirruping, and yes, that sound down there on the beach is someone skipping over the rocks. And when I look, it's him. The mist is heavier there, and he looks more like a tiger than ever before, and yet completely a boy, with knee-high socks on, a child all at once. And what were we here for anyway? What had we come to find? Because it's not here, and neither is the ocean. For example, in nothing is tenderness as important as here. I dreamt that I sent you a poem and you replied, "You're an amateur, you're gorgeous," and then we swapped sex tapes. Except, of course, I stole mine off the internet, and it wasn't a sex tape, but a collage full of people. And someone had a finger in someone else's mouth, and I was on the train to Dublin, I was on the train to somewhere, and there were my siblings, all of a blur, and we sat down, all wearing white Victorian blouses, because that's the style, and it's Pebble Dash, and it's the solstice, and how nice to be young and able to steal a sex tape, and how shocked I was to see you, even if it was only in my dream on the way to Dublin, or not on the way to Dublin, I'm not sure. For example, this happens more often than you may think. We were circled round low tables listening, and that was about the height of it. And before that, there'd been stone engravings, marble dresses, climbing over rocks covered in moss to read it, when really it meant nothing to us. And then a train ride underwater that lasted only minutes but felt extreme. I wanted to play in the carnival, but every time I went to find an instrument, the music, water had evaporated, making it impossible. And anyway, we were on a flight to China and the doors were opened and we were still moving and the air hostess said, "That's it, breathe it in." And we all filled our lungs with the dark blue ink of the sky before the plane took off again. And that was all, folks, nothing special here. For example, on a regular and friendly basis. We were sketching, and of course, I've never been very good at it, letting the lines shape the image rather than the thing itself in front of me. And the deal was, I'd bathe my feet in the stream, but never jump, submerge myself the whole way in, and you'd leave me alone for the whole of eternity. But it's never that easy, and by the time I'd finished my sketch of the scene with the tree and the concrete and the sky, you'd gone, and I laughed, but more so I cried, or at least I tried to. For example, somewhere there is a history of progress. We were in America, we were on a trip, and yet we were home, and by home I mean that the bathroom was familiar. I remembered the green tiled walls and the dark wooden cabinet. I remembered moving the cabinet from our old home into this one. And there was a bar serving iced tea, but you had to ask for lemon or wine if you preferred, and almost everyone was there. And I went to wake you because we were late, but someone was watching you sleep, and they said you weren't late at all. So I went out into the snow and thought about running the Goodwill store because the owner of the bar said it would be a good career move. Notes upon attendance. One of your responsibilities is to think of yourself as alone. Another, to query the war. There are too many to choose from. To understand as a character the fabric of it. To have a privileged relationship with language. Most of what you understand is wrong. You cannot say, this is a simple thing. Complex things resurrect the ordinary, and you must. To give a character something she cannot escape is a cosmic injustice. Not an exact measurement. And when was it we heard the deer being shot? Strange that at the time we couldn't have known it was a deer. Only by seeing it, dead, slung over a shoulder, did we understand. And yet, every time I replay it in my memory, the sound of the shot ringing out, unmistakably a deer, glimpsed through trees, upright, and then not. Okay, now I'm going to read the second sequence, which I've been kind of writing throughout lockdown. So there's lots of parties. Basically, I've just been writing poems about parties and like wanting to have dinner with lots of people and just being outside of my house. So I've got, I think I've got about 6 or 7 of these. They're not titled, obviously, but the overall title is I'm Very Much Able to Love. Well, I'm not sure. What are you bringing to the party? I'll be spooning raw honey from intricate goblets into Clementine's mouth as she perches on a rooftop in Portland, or was it El Paso? So I'll miss the party, and that's just fine, because I hate the smell of horses after evening rain, the pyrotechnic slap of thunder, the dirty dandelion roots, whispered imagery of death, the hubbub of cyclists, the miserable cats, the crescent moon, cold coffee, trumpets, and trees, which is how these parties always go, and I'll not be sad to miss it. I'll not. And as I said, I'll be busy at the side of Clementine's graceless sniper, scooping honey, thick and granular, watching the perfectly soundless, starless sky, and measuring our capabilities while parachutes rain down and surround us. Wow, you were suddenly so achingly cool and sat on my bed in denim shorts and a halter top, and it was apparently the end of the world, or at least New Year, and everyone was trying to party. Patty Ann was in the corner, concerning herself with the construction of a delicate formation of salt and stones, which she was filming and planning to project onto swathes of blue fabric. Don't tell me we're not engaged in performance art in this town, we'll find Patty Ann saying almost every night of the week. But no one ever disagrees with her, except, of course, for you, Clementine. For you, performative illusions hold no weight, and tonight you'll flick your hair over your bare shoulder and wink at no one in particular, the room having trained its eye on the formation. We should probably go to the great exhibitions more often, Clementine says within a minute of us leaving the party. Not that I'm much surprised when we do go to them. I just miss that feeling of being alone in darkened spaces where someone might possibly shout at me but never does, or at least hasn't yet, and wouldn't it be delightful? Lizzie says I'm far too aggressive, but I think it's cinematographic, don't you? I don't much like to see or be seen or to be seen seeing, and I don't much like to be purposefully soft. Let me hollow out the inside of a person or situation or whatever. I just miss that feeling, the classic future lyrical, the horizontal interrupted, when wildfire was a thing of purpose, destruction was meaning and absurd. The soy sauce has an interesting saltiness, says Harriet, killing any hope I'd fostered that this was going to be an entertaining dinner. I'd wasted the day reflecting on the theory of the exaggerated intellectual with a real human aching soul on the other end of it, and was trying to convince Clementine otherwise. So there's a minimalism built into the structure of it, a wariness consumed by a never-ending hope towards a feeble capturing of the next big idea. I'm trying hard to pretend that this was all research and not a fucked performance. And later that night, she asks for my forgiveness for this poem she's written me into, but I'm too busy drinking a litre bottle of soy sauce and shouting at Harriet, I love this. We thought to call it a collaboration, the eggs, the oil, the honey, and the salt. We were highly engaged with the idea of it, the thickened viscose mud of it. Put me in a cauldron and fix the lid down on it. Put me in a tank top and spin me round and round in it. Somewhere large expanses of air lifted us up, and to the sweet grey clouds we sang of it. Harriet was partial to it, but Harriet was also fond of eating handfuls of parsley for her supper, and Harriet just loved the moon, and frankly, Harriet bored me. I'd give my left leg to never hear Harriet talk of the moon to it. I'd give my love of crows and sun and everything glorious to it. Shoot me out a rocket and I'll land in the thin-leaved ginger birch tree and I'll sing of it, sing of it, sing of it, sing. I was spending a great deal of my time thinking quite deeply about aubergines. I decided to do something about it and set out to write a long sequence of poems. These poems were long, unwieldy passages in which I unpacked all my feelings about aubergines. When I finally admitted to Clarissa my wild obsession, all she said was, "Is it about how aubergines have the same texture as a baby's arm?" But they weren't, and this admission just increased my appreciation. And now, whenever I see Clarissa, I know that all she's thinking about is how I would probably love to take her nephew's tiny arm and bite into it, or perhaps baste it in a garlic chili oil first, salt it, and lay a napkin on my lap before I started to really get stuck in. There was an uneven number of people at the party that night, which I found unnecessarily pleasing. Because I'd spent all day in the garden centre cafe writing a specially long passage about an aubergine dish I'd eaten in a restaurant in the Chinatown in Newcastle last spring, I was finding it difficult to make conversation and ended up talking at length to a stranger about mathematics and the correlation between a light breeze and telepathy, which was making me green and sickly. I was stuck on a point in the poem where I was attempting to describe how I'd ordered extra rice to soak up the oily garlic at the bottom of the bowl, but it was sounding too prosaic, and I couldn't encapsulate the disdain in the waiter's face. My authorial presence delights me, Clarissa says, posturing about outside the party one night. But what I really love is the unacknowledged evil of it all. How special I must be to see it, is what I'm always thinking, but I'd never say, just gesture towards some fantastical ideal of the bright lights. I suppose I don't necessarily disagree with Clarissa, but let's just suppose that I've grown quite tired of her. I bought these aubergines, pale purple, each one fitted in the palm of my hand. I'd been a bit obsessed with them all day. I fried them in oil with salt and cloves of garlic that I crushed with the flat side of the knife until the skins blistered, and I soaked them in vinegar. It was an attempt towards working my way out of the poems, but so far I'd had no luck. By the time we've barricaded ourselves inside the pastel pink house with the small irregular windows, we realise that the animals have disappeared from view. And so we celebrate with sparkling wine and dancing, but with a dispirit that could really haunt you. I can barely stand up, and it's unfortunate. The muscles in my left thigh spasm with every breath, and I retreat to the corner and drink from the bottle and try not to breathe. Someone switches the radio station and we hear reports that the lion, our main adversary, has been spotted in the vicinity of the multiplex cinema car park by a group of elderly women who, having just seen the latest Yorgos Lanthimos film, were taken aback but not quite surprised to see the lion stretched out and softly cleaning herself. The experiment was not going to plan, and any attempts to rectify it always ended in the garden with large wedges of brie, green olives, red wine, and all this often in the mid-afternoon sun. I half-heartedly pick up books and bring them to the table. Architecture for Beginners, How Fascism Works, The Futurist Cookbook, some triangular thoughts. Because there is an ocean and I refuse to look at, you claim to be setting sail tomorrow. I drag out the gigantic copper saucepan and arguments against hegemonic order. Revolutionize your brothers, Antonio tells us, but I couldn't care what cause my brothers were fighting from the rooftops of Madrid and Sao Paulo. Do you feel at home now? Can you make me good pasta? Will you applaud wildly, or should I? That's all my poems.
That was fantastic. Thanks so much, Manuela. I am never going to look at an aubergine the same way again. And those were wonderful. Thank you. All right. So next we're going to hear from Padraig Regan. Padraig is the author of 2 poetry pamphlets, Delicious, published by Lifeboat in 2016, and Who Seemed Alive and Altogether Real, by the Emma Press in 2017. In 2015, they were a recipient of an Eric Gregory Award. They hold a PhD on creative, critical, and hybridized writing practices in medieval texts and the work of Anne Carson from the Seamus Heaney Centre, Queen's University, Belfast. Padraig's work asks to be read and reread. Though often grounded in precise details, such as the sensuous descriptions of food in their pamphlet Delicious, or the study of paintings by Caravaggio in Who Seemed Alive and Altogether Real, it takes time to fully appreciate the scope of the work. Padraig studies appearances, how we view ourselves compared to how we are perceived and how we perceive others. Padraig's poems are always full of rich, sensory details, the pinkness of a quince, the lush details of an old master painting, the physical delight of bathing in sea herbs. Padraig draws us into their world again and again, yet constantly pulls the rug out from under us. Reading their work is a compelling, delightful experience, full of surprises. I'm thrilled they're with us today. So please go ahead, Padraig.
Thank you so much for that, Rosamund, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this. It's a real joy for me to read with Stephen and Manuela. I mean, I've read with these guys many times over the years in Belfast and other places, and it's just lovely to hear new work by them. Okay, so I have got a document of poems here. I'm going to start with a poem called Pitcher Plants, which, if you don't know, are those sort of kind of bell-shaped plants that are full of sort of digestive fluids, and they sort of wait for insects or small creatures to kind of fall into them, which they then digest. So this is pitcher plants. I loved them when I was too young to think of condoms as I saw them bunched and hanging from the iron skeleton of the old greenhouse. Like quicksand, they occupied more space inside my head than they have come to warrant. I thought balloon, I thought soft bell with a liquid middle, I thought wet glove for a single finger. I knew they do what mouths do, but I didn't know the half of what a mouth could do. And now I can't decide if I want to live like this lip trumpet, whose only closure is a leaf-thin leaf that isn't big enough to plug its open throat, and who accepts whatever comes its way, the living, the dead, and all their mixed excretions. That there is grace in suffering is not an excuse for suffering. I know this. I know my jaw when it aches. I know my teeth. As Rosamund mentioned, something that I find myself writing about a lot is food and the act of eating. And I think the reason why I'm interested so much in that is that eating is this sort of habitual act that we do multiple times every day. And it's something that forces us to really confront our own physical embodiment. And I think it's also something where we're kind of confronted with the fact that our bodies are not, stable and sort of complete and self-sustained objects, but they're sites whose boundaries are constantly being transgressed. Our bodies are things that are constantly having to be made and remade and unmade. So I'm going to cycle through a bunch of poems now that are about food and about eating. The first of them is called Risotto. Midnight, and my thoughts have turned to starch. How best to break it down part way before my body does the rest. The paper around the garlic like sheets of dry skin. The skin around the onions like paper. I try to stop my thoughts from turning to the bird whose bones I've commandeered and put to use in a way quite unintended. The grains of rice are short and fat, and as they're tossed in the warm oil turn translucent at their edges, but keep a kernel of themselves dense white. They are like the spawn of some amphibian. Everything I do to rob them of their nature. It has been a month or more since I have touched another human skin. I am okay with this. I divest a lemon of its rind. It comes away in filaments. Each one is yellow and minutely curled as saffron threads, which I can't afford. I add the fat I've stolen from some calf I'll never meet. I eat it, and I think I should have added more. I eat it, and I think about the moment that it will become not it, but I. And not without regret, I feel this process taking place. I hate my commitment to making more self to hate. It is not without regret. Oh, this is a very new poem, actually. It is called Study of a Tomato. I think sort of in my mind when I was writing this was the Wallace Stevens poem, Study of Two Pears. Study of a Tomato. Imagine it, substantial as a planet and twice as red. Begin with this. Establish an outline, round as ontology, but solid, filled with as much tomato as it can hold. It has no bones, no beak, no claws. Its form is soft and softer. It is mostly juice, which is not blood and not unlike it. It has and is, like everything, a body. Let's open it. Here is the pulp in which your tongue might read the seasoned rainfall and map the land it fell upon. Here are the seeds to which it's so devoted. And here is that little green nipple you've likely by now plucked out, which implies the vine and all its red brethren. It does not speak. It is not a symbol for menstruation or the absence thereof. This is this, and only this. Pavlova, the campest of all desserts. Pavlova. It has such ease. It holds its shape like a cat, bonelessly relaxed. Do I resent it? Its gloss, how it resists the whip by loving it? To spread is to begin negotiations. It clings to the spoon like history. It goes coral hard in the oven and waits for morning when I'll pick it up and tap its base and judge it. Sometimes I think the fact that I am still alive is a sign of my own lack of conviction. A roast. The chicken is spatchcocked and nothing like a book, but it lies open and creases where its spine once was. It imposes its own urgent presence upon the table. It gives meaning to the silverware and crockery, our teeth and the tongues that lie behind them. There is charcoal on my fingers and on everything now. I've been working on a study of the Christ of the Foundations, the crucifix St. Teresa carried from Avila to Arevalo. There is a smudge of shadow where his ribs meet his abdomen. His hips are wider than you would expect. The chicken is nothing like a dress, but its fibres fall apart in response to my attempts to portion it. There is a scraping of forks on plates, a clicking of knives. I've been having trouble with his face. I've been trying to map the light that shapes his unmistakable cheekbones, and it resists. The buddleia creaks over the back wall, and the moon, for the occasion, has dressed as the moon. A machine for harvesting olives. The limb of a nude umbrella, a makeshift robot's hand, a rake that chose to specialise. We introduce it to the tree and comb through the branches. The olives fall onto a tarp like fat, soft hailstones, each one its own insistent fact, a symbol meaning olive. Some leaves are unavoidable. A rough barber, says the tree. It has dragged my children from their home in my knotted form. You think I do not know what happens in the press? There my children weep and die. Their oily souls are wrung from the pulp that once they called themselves. Well, it would say that, wouldn't it? A pumpkin. With effort I get the knife in, and with a little hinging of the wrist I split the fruit along a shallow runnel, where its form suggests it wants to split. It exposes its creamy interior. Its flesh, like all flesh, is a distraction. It wraps around an orange mess of filaments. I scoop this out. I pull each pale seed from its entanglement. And because I want the violence more intimate, I do this with my hands, and feel its wet potential turn to pulp beneath my nails. By now the fruit is more the absence of itself, an orange cup enclosing what it's lost. There are many things I should confess. To begin with, this vicious sympathy, this want and inability to know how it feels to hold a space at the centre of oneself and have it filled, to bend the self around the presence of something not quite other, not quite I, to give the body up as nourishment. I cut the pumpkin's 2 bright domes to crescent moons. I do this in the hope that when the resurrection comes, everything I have subjected thus will be returned inviolate, and I'll be nothing and forgiven. Rehydrating mushrooms. I'm thinking of how mushrooms will haunt a wet log like bulbous ghosts, of how a mushroom may be considered a travesty of a flower in the way that a wolf may be a travesty of a grandmother. Personally, I don't believe in ghosts, but it has been 3 months since a man was shot in a street just next to where I live, and now it seems the ghosts are everywhere. In clouds that stay around the fringes of the sky, in a blur in a photograph when the camera jerked away, in a thumbprint smudge on my glasses lens. When I add water, the mushrooms swirl like dull confetti. They begin to print themselves onto the water, their flavour. A week without rain is enough to set my skin ticking, so when it comes, prefigured by the smell of it, and thunder playing at the edges of earshot, I go out to greet it, in a tracing paper thin dress, no tights, and it falls on my head like a bolt of gauze, and in undisclosed locations, bodies seep into the water table. It is the first Monday of June 2016. That poem pivots quite nicely into the last two that I want to read, which are not really food poems, although the first one could be. I think in these last two poems, what I'm trying to do is in some way think about the landscape, and particularly the Irish landscape. I think I'm trying to think about the ways in which the events of history are sort of physically encoded into the landscape itself. And the first of these last two is called History. Pink and quivering fresh, a 2-inch strip of salmon rests on a rice pillow with a sash of nori tied around its waist. It sings against the green of what we cannot know is real wasabi or a common radish dyed with spinach. The windows fog and sweat, and on their other side umbrellas open like the fleshy skirts that once ringed the mouth of this anemone I cannot wait to try. It all comes served on a model boat, 28 cuts of mollusk and fish, each one precise and gleaming on the wood. Some lounge on the deck, and some have climbed the rigging where no sail catches no wind and doesn't swell. Surely there's a rock up by Lacada Point where 1,300 Spanish ghosts have crowded since 1588. In 1270, Aquinas didn't ask how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, but 4 years later pilchards turned a herring in his mouth. I will not eat this octopus on account of its ensoulment. I'll go easy on the tuna on account of the mercury marbled through its fat. I'll cleanse my palate with ginger. 260 bodies washed ashore and were buried at St. Cuthbert's Church. 9 more were shipped to Scotland with their ghosts still in them, which leaves 1,000 rotting in the kelp. What markets of worms and algae boomed around them? What bones are reconfigured in the shell this clam inhabited? In 1967, the ghosts that didn't leave the ship watched as the world's first aquanaut dragged their spilled mounds of gold to the surface. Among the artifacts recovered were astrolabes, brooches, crucifixes, etc. They are now laid out precise and gleaming on velvet mounts in the Ulster Museum. In 2014, the Glenavy River stock of fish sank to its bed, like a bag of dropped coins, like the record of 1,000 wishes. A year later, mackerel spilled from a truck to the wet tarmac of the Ravenhill Road, whose residents ignored the warning not to eat them. Their provenance was never ascertained. Aquinas concluded that no one man is strong enough to row a boat alone, which is to say that even our ghosts can't fill us. What isn't theft, now that even the seas are watered down? I'm still hungry. I guess this wasn't quite enough to share. And the last poem that I'm going to read is something that Manuela asked me to read for an event she was doing at the Mac Art Gallery in Belfast about a year or two ago. And in this piece, I'm responding to some video works by Francis Hegarty and Andrew Stones, who do this, have been doing this ongoing practice involving sort of investigating a plot of land in County Donegal. The poem is called It Only Remains. I saw the pumpkin's orange skins half nestled in the soil like infants, fat and angry. The plot was cordoned off with candy-striped tape that snapped and loosened. It had rained all day until it stopped. The ground was buttery and slack. Its surface was a carnival of worms. Its inside was an aggregate of coins and teeth and other small losses. A book of songs, a bird's fluted bones, an iron leprous with rust, some metal tools eroded to the point of being undesigned, chips of horn and shell, the fractured architecture of a plastic crate. I saw all this despite the fact I wasn't there, which is to say I made it up. I saw the mercury and sulfur levels rise inexorably. I saw the priest handsome in his robes. I saw the subtle bow of the horizon, which is the privilege of landlords and photographers, and above it swans like handkerchiefs. Oh, Constance, how good of you to come. I almost didn't see you underneath that hat. I didn't see the tree or see it falling, but I saw the flap of thready earth it ripped up with its roots, and saw the fungus colonize the hollow where it stood. I saw the fruiting bodies, and I felt only the sadness I was supposed to feel. Which leaves the question of the tree itself, or how am I supposed to know if this bulk of wood drying in the lumber shed is it, and not just equal to its weight? Charles, I'll take your word for it. I understand you had some problems in France. I wasn't there, but I saw the bones upright in the churned fields like sundials and time growing in the empty boots. Nowhere goes to waste, and a scrap of tape comes loose and twists about the winds and settles in the branches of a tree it can't quite yet bring down. This is objective and entire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Padraig. I really enjoyed that. That was really fascinating and full of images that are going to stay with me. So thank you. So next we're going to hear from Stephen Sexton. I've enjoyed hearing Stephen read several times before, and he's a hugely accomplished poet. His first book, If All the World and Love Were Young, was the winner of the Forward Prize for Best First Collection in 2019, and the Shine Strong Award for Best First Collection in 2020. He was awarded the Ian Forster Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature in 2020. He was the winner of the National Poetry Competition in 2016, and the recipient of an Eric Gregory Award in 2018. He teaches at the Seamus Heaney Centre for Poetry at Queen's University, Belfast. The title of his first collection, If All the World and Love Were Young, comes from a pastoral poem by Walter Raleigh, while the poems themselves follow the structure of the video game Super Mario World, each section named after a level of the game. This collision of lyric tradition and innovative modern references is a defining element of Stephen's work. Stephen has a gift for capturing an internal space and making it accessible to the reader. His elegies enter the reader's mind and create an intimacy that allows us to become part of the emotional journey of the poems. Welcome, Stephen. I'm really looking forward to hearing you read.
Thank you, Rosamund. It is lovely to be with you. Thank you for the kind invitation to read some poems. And to echo Padraig, it is lovely to read poems with Manuela and Padraig. And thank you to Rosamund for that introduction. I'm going to read some poems from that book that you mentioned. So yeah, your introduction is extremely helpful. I start with a little note at the start. I'm going to read that and then a frolic through some of the poems. Yeah, this is a book about Super Mario World that's pretending it's not an elegy. That's it. So a note and then a sort of handful of poems. In the summer of 1998, when I was 9, my mother took a photograph of me playing Super Mario World in the small spare room in our house. My back is to the camera. The television was positioned so it faced out from the corner of the room where the wall met the patio door. To my left, I could see the garden along which a little river ran, and over the fields a dense forest. To my right, there was the huge block of the television, which was already 15 or 16 years old. My eyes drifted between these two positions. Because of the flash of the camera and the glare of the television screen, it's impossible to tell which of the following levels I'm playing. The Super Nintendo is a 16-bit console. Put simply, 16-bit refers to how much memory the system can process at one time. Donut Secret 2. It is winter in the Ulster Hospital, and winter outdoors, and winter in our hemisphere. The tilt of the planet says so. Since she has lost her sense of taste, we have dinner in McDonald's. If I'm going to die, she says, might as well go to McDonald's. The kitchen bleeps and chirps and blips, the cryptolect of ICUs, whose automatic song desires no singer's articulation. Her hair is thin under the light, and surgery will be discussed tonight while fleets of gritters salt all the main arterial routes. The country roads we travel home by purple and glisten with frost, under the constellations and the Sagittarian moon. Vanilla Dome 1. Now we must beware of the cave. After a few days of fasting, the anesthesiologist apothecaries carefully, and the personable surgeon goes under the skin precisely. I go down into the dark mines where my name clings like a horseshoe, and deeper until the stream of my blood runs as black as the coal. In Kimberley, diamonds have grown in the walls for thousands of years. The mines dug out by hand have left countless thousands dead, having not chosen the underground if they could help it. And so bright diamonds is what I think of, diamonds grown without a thimbleful of light. Beautiful time goes by slowly, and the surgeon covers his tracks. Vanilla Fortress. I'm swimming with the coelacanths rotting in the flooded fortress. The unbeautiful things propel themselves in flat trajectories. So many years have we missed you, little fish, little Lazarus, fossil king of the underbite. Not that you knew you were missing. They will not see me swimming here, the darkest fathoms of the keep, where spikes are falling from the roof and bone machines roam dismally among spine-topped anemones marauding on the castle floor. To suffer, suffer everywhere, and not a moment stop to think, let the world go on without me. The next life will find me happy and adrift, peddling the swans. Some bright day the sun names the boats one by one in the marina. This will have been so long ago by then, and I will have missed you, for so long will I have missed you. Cookie Mountain. Now that the cancer's been excised, the clouds are almost meaningless. A sparrow's not a metaphor for shipping out on rocky seas. There is no creaking in the house. So I crush biscuits in a bag, add sugar and golden syrup, raisins, heave the mess in a tray. Since she can't stand for very long, I make tiffins for the bake sale. No one is going to like this, I say, but I have done my best. She prints her name unsteadily on a white adhesive label for the biscuit tin that had been her mother's before it was hers. Her mother's before it was hers. Snow-topped mountains, circling birds. Forest of Illusion 1. Whatever language the trees speak in the temple of the forest, the knot of dark eyes signalling in the goat willow's eastern skin, or the spiny caterpillar making letters on the branches, it is familiar to me as sunset must be to nightfall. Not to be read, but understood, says the trickle of the river. And without saying anything, on the tree lands the butterfly, some call the Camberwell beauty, and others call the morning cloak. Forest of Illusion 2. Catkins drop into the river. Their spines gone limp, they float along its course and wind up in the lake where the rainbow trout spawns in spring. I caught one once, with an old rod of fiberglass and a fat worm almost split in half on a hook and wriggling for all it was worth. Under the dark surface, flashes of colour, the hook speeding off like a silver key on the line until I stopped it with a flick of the wrist and hoisted the fish from one world and into the next. Blue Switch Palace. Colours, sounds, perfumes correspond. Hedgehogs wander the woods at night, as loud as newborn children's hair, or singing like the fallow fields. Some bird is cawing amphibrax the colour of the gibbous moon. A mouse is coinage in the yard like motor oil or 6 bright stones. Like 6 bright stones are sweet as milk, the owl can see for 16 reds, an insect moving through the grass, and swoop down like a broken cord, and sleep then like a bag of bulbs, while hedgehogs slowly start to rain. Forest Ghost House. Nature is a temple of trees. Oboes pass the time in boxwood. I go along the narrow path, so faint it's hardly even there, until the wilderness gives way to a paddock that's part barbed wire, part palisade, where the only sound is of the passing river. Trotting through the fenced-off clearing, shoeless and a barrel of ribs, emaciated, roomy of eye, fearful of its own body, the turmoil of its aching flanks and rickety legs, a white horse. Forest of Illusion 4. She plants roses in the garden, now that the wound is almost healed. With a little trowel, I dig and bury the bulbs she scatters. It's like another life, she thinks. The days go by in gratefulness, with amber, incense, gooseberries growing on gooseberry bushes. She will not be the same, of course, but nor will anybody else. Now that the wound is almost healed, the nights go by so silently that if you tried, you'd almost hear the roses sleeping in their bulbs. Forest Secret Area. High above the forest, one sees the curve of the peninsula. A farmer continues to plough, whose workhorse walks dully along. A shepherd looks out for wolves that skulk through crags and crevices. An angler seeks out plump brook trout. A Spanish galleon lingers hugely in the bay, the white sails burly with wind, the conifer mast holding, snetted of branches and needles on the forest floor, the rigging like a piece of gauze in sweet and favourable winds. Forest of Illusion 3. It's almost the end of summer, and Saturday, the radio in the kitchen is a havoc of Oma, way beyond the loch, and of Slevin's, the chemist shop, of children running in the road, of a group of Spanish tourists, of the Assumption of Mary insofar as it can be seen. I pause in the darkened forest. With a dram of soap and water, my brother blows bubbles all day, each of iridescent shimmer, each a shallow breath in transit. Forest Fortress. We go together to the church on the hill over the village, the wild country green behind it. In other places it's not noon, but here it is. The coffin rests with a wealthiness of flowers. My mother was a child with her. How quickly 50 years can go. I am the light of the world, says the sermon. The stained glass window says St. Peter with rays of light. The first colour television she ever saw was in her house, my mother says, and we all stand. Roy's Castle. The house's windows are undressed, and with her old-fashioned singer, she's putting stitches in some bolts of blue fabric. The small piston fires all through the evening, and its industry of needles runs a track through the radio softly playing Roy Orbison. The whole world could be this one room she'll in a future return to. The curtains she's making, all drawn against the light, against July. The sewing machine ticks so fast, these small years go by in minutes. Wendy's castle. The afternoon is bright and clear as a bell tolling on the hour. Music seeps from a radio playing at the nurse's station. Some Wendy sings her final songs in a voice low as a whisper, as bright as a shower of sparks sheared off in a welder's workshop. Patients shuffle by with their bones emerging from their thinning skins, from the necklines of their kirtles, their blue cotton hospital gowns. So we wait in the private room, turn the egg timer of our cells. Hippocrates in his white coat brings with him a shake of the head, brings with him the word for sorry, which is the word for we have done everything within our powers. We have shaken out our potions, we have cast our shining magic, and where we cannot do some good, at least we must refrain from harm. And the traffic lights are changing, and the traffic will dribble on along the busy carriageway towards the beach or barbecues because it's the summer solstice. And then the talk of opiates, of comfort and what's possible, of a cloak threaded with morphine, another castle to die in. I'm sorry, she wanted to say, my body won't cooperate. My body's become overcome. Though she did not say anything, but stared as if to recall how my face looked when she first saw me. Valley Ghost House. Bright brother, it is you I seek in the cobwebs in the alcoves, as though images of us still roam there or are in the future. Anyway, should you hear some evening that creak or keen of timber on the landing, think of the house we grew up in, the begonias patterned across the stairs, the fuzz of carpet against your cheek. Think that this creaking now is just us long ago when we were young, the toy trains zooming through the rooms, the secret door in the hedgerows, where hosts of robins passing make exactly the sound of the wind. Valley of Bowser 3. It's so short, she says, it's so short, it doesn't feel like I've been here at all, and now I have to go. The bluish light is from a lamp. The portable television we brought from home is standing by. I won't get to see what happens to you or your brother, she says, as if our lives were determined already along one sure path. No grandchildren and no first steps, and never again a first word. My first word, she says, was apple, or something like apple. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Stephen. That was fantastic. Very moving. I think one of the hardest things about not reading to an audience is that you don't get the response. And I think you would all have got a lot of applause and enthusiasm from the audience. So please imagine that, even if you're not actually hearing it. So I'm going to ask just a few questions about your work of all three of you. And please feel free to jump in and ask questions of one another too. I was going to start with Manuela. As I was listening to your first sequence particularly, I was thinking about travel and how and the movement of people. And I was wondering, and I know that you've won the travel award, so I was wondering how much kind of travel and movement has an influence on your own work.
Oh, that's really interesting. Hadn't thought much about it. The travel award, yeah, I really didn't think I was going to get that, and I said I was going to travel by boat, and I think I get seasick. So I'm a little nervous, but luckily I've managed to put it off because of not really wanting to travel at the moment. that first sequence of poems they were all basically my dreams that I kept on writing down, and so that's why there's maybe lots of movement in a weird way, but they form part of like a much longer poem or sequence of poems, which is about my grandpa and ideas of nationality and refugees and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess movement and travel is definitely in there, but I think those poems maybe like come from somewhere, come from like a dreamscape. Yeah.
I suppose dreaming is another form of travel.
Yeah, that's true. I like dreaming, so.
So that's really good. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask you a question too, Padraig, and this one is maybe a little bit self-indulgent. I saw that you were writing about Anne Carson in your PhD, and I really, really admire her work, and I wondered if you felt like she was a big influence on you.
I think it would be really hard to claim Anne Carson as an influence. I think that would come off sounding really, really arrogant, because no one can do what Anne Carson does. Nobody has that kind of mind that she has. I think if I've been influenced by Anne Carson in any way, it's a sense of perhaps the poem as a record of thought. There was actually an interview or an extract from an interview that I saw being shared around on Twitter about this the other day, where Anne Carson talked about how the poem, she was talking about mimesis, and she was saying that all poems are mimetic, but not perhaps in the way that we often think. All poems are mimetic insofar as they replicate a thought process. And then make the viewer inhabit the stages of that thought process. And I think that's something that I'm really interested in, is how the movements of thought can be put into a poem. I think another thing that I'm really interested in, and that's kind of related to that, is causation. Which is something that I really noticed in both those poems you read, Manuela and Stephen, and sort of what kind of interesting things can be done with poetry if you say that things are because of other things, and building up, it builds all these very odd relationships into a poem.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I can see what you mean about Anne Carson's work being about how we have thoughts, and I definitely see that in your own work as well. I think I often come back to some of the work of the poet Rilke, in that I always feel like he's reaching towards something that's gone beyond meaning, because our thought has kind of gone beyond how we can use language, and that's something that fascinates me. It was great listening to you read, Stephen, and something that I'm often struck by in that particular collection is that every poem seems to be in a particular syllabic scheme, and I wondered what led you to use those particular syllabics, and whether you experimented with other styles while you were writing.
Thanks for counting them, Rosamund. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sort of weird. I want to, joke isn't the right word, but it's as close as I can come to it. I suppose what I started doing was, it's a really, I guess we might talk about syllabic schemes as being useful, restrictions, on language where, restrictions might cause you to make different kinds of choices that you wouldn't ordinarily make if you're strict with a kind of system. So I have 16 syllable lines, but that's large enough to swim in. You can do whatever you want. That doesn't lead you to make different choices, because you can always turn something around within 16 syllables. If you're working with like a 5 syllable line, I think you've got to make choices. But 16, you can kind of do whatever you want. So it was a very mild way of trying to make the lines feel very, I guess, angular. The Super Nintendo is a 16-bit system. Its processor, can deal with 16 bits of information at once, which is a very small piece of information compared to what we use our machines to do now. So there was some element of trying to make myself use language in a way that replicated an idea of a processor, like long sweeps, long cycles. It's a bit of a unfunny pun on memory, of processing phases of memory or lines of memory. So it's not something that was generative in terms of different thoughts or different ideas, because you can talk yourself into anything with 16 syllables. It was really just a way of making me think about making these little texts feel square and angular and feel a bit pixelated. But I guess the main thing, I suppose, is there's a very severe lack of punctuation, so everything can feel a little jilted and a little pixelated, I hope. But yeah, these long lines hopefully make it kind of square.
I love that it's kind of a pun. That's a very interesting way to organize your line structure. I love that. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to anything before I go on to another question? No, that's fine. I was, particularly when I was reading, I think all of your work really, I kind of think about that we could probably all be defined as millennials, and we are in a particular generation. And I wonder, do you feel like our generation has a zeitgeist? Does that idea feel completely irrelevant to you, or is that something that you kind of feel is there in your work?
I don't know if I've ever thought about it in terms of a zeitgeist, because I'm not 100% sure what exactly that term means, and if it is really that zeitgeisty, I feel like I probably wouldn't have access to it. But I think that there certainly are shared material and political circumstances that all three of us would have experienced, and that other people our age would have experienced. The memory of the 2008 financial crash, for example, and then in the UK. So all three of us are from the north, technically still in the UK, and the years of austerity policies under the liberal conservative government, and then conservative government subsequently. I think whenever we're talking about this as well, another thing that I think does sort of form a particular identity or another commonality amongst people of our age is that we have such a different relationship to the history and the conflict in the north of Ireland. I think it was our friend Stephen Connolly said something like, ours is the generation of the bomb scare, not the bomb. So I think that is, a kind of particular sort of temporal, a particular circumstance that is really shared by people of probably our age.
Yeah, I mean, if I may say, I mean, I guess one of the things that when I think of where this generational split might happen, I'm not sure, what is the cutoff for millennials? Is it 1980 something or 1980?
I think so.
Which I guess is roundabouts, right, isn't it? But I mean, I feel as though I feel as though we're all still kind of working out what the internet is. I mean, that's like a sort of gigantic presence in my life. And I mean, certainly while I'm not thinking directly about what the internet is, I am very interested in, how technologies of communication are very different, how we understand the image as being really different. I guess we are all not only consumers of images, let's say, but we can make them. We're, makers of images and sharers of images. And I guess I am fundamentally interested in what that's like, because, we get to, we have a greater access to that kind of function, I think, than the generation that preceded us. And I guess we're all about the same age where we understand the two worlds. I remember, the lovely days of my life before and after the internet. But I guess for generations that are younger, there won't really be a time where it didn't exist as such. I guess they may well not have the same kind of access to it as they will later as adults. But yeah, the idea that that the generation that's growing up now will inherit all of this stuff kind of ready made. They won't go through the same kind of discovery that I did in like 1997 when I feel I used the internet for the first time. So I feel as though that's a big thing, and all the associated technologies of communication and image sharing and how that affects how we see ourselves personally and with relationship to each other, how we can have these conversations. Lovely conversations in a very digital format and existing as images of ourselves, rather than, perhaps one of Padraig's eloquently put, like, considerations about being embodied, like we're kind of not at the minute. And I'm interested in that. I don't know how to work any of that out, but I feel as though that must be something that brings us together.
Yeah, I would certainly relate to a lot of that. I think it's interesting that we have a kind of global cultural language that we maybe didn't have until quite recently. Like when I read your poem, Stephen, I've never played Super Mario World, and yet I know exactly what you're talking about. It's somehow filtered into me just through being alive right now, I think. And I find that very interesting.
I find it interesting too. A little like kind of troubling that you can have knowledge of things you've never had direct knowledge of, or something. It's strange.
Absolutely.
Where all this is absorbed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I was going to ask you about was that you've all studied at Queen's, and I wondered what influence you would say that maybe Belfast or the university in particular has had on you.
Yeah, I'm obviously not from Northern Ireland or Ireland, but I moved here about 10 years ago, so I'm not necessarily like all the things that Padraig was talking about kind of like post-conflict. It's been really interesting living here and kind of figuring it all out, and it feeling like a very, very different space and country to the north of England where I grew up. And then being at Queen's, we just have it's such a lovely community, and I think we've had really fantastic teachers, and obviously now Stephen is one of them, although he's never taught me, I guess Stephen has taught me things in the pub, just not in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of have to mention Kieran Carson there, who would have been a massive sort of formative influence on all three of us. I can feel quite confident saying that. His own writing, but also as a teacher at Queen's. Like I always remember Kieran. One of the things that Kieran would always say was some variation of, if you know what the poem is going to be before you write it, don't bother. That the poem has to be surprising to you as a writer, otherwise it isn't going to be in any way interesting to your reader. And I think that that's something that all three of us absolutely took to heart, and all three of us try to operate within that sort of maxim as much as possible, albeit in very different ways. So yeah, I think it's sort of, I think when we talk about what influence studying at Queen's had, we have to talk really about Kieran. We also probably should mention like Sinead Morrissey, Leontia Flynn, Paul Mattern, who would have been the other teachers at about the same time when we would have been undergraduates. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can definitely see that Kieran Carson maxim in your work, that that you want to surprise the reader, because it's certainly something that I see in all three of your work.
Yeah,
sorry, Stephen, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, I'm careful. I want to be careful not to repeat anything that's being said. I mean, all of that is absolutely true, and I mean, I'm very fortunate and very happy to be able to teach there, and to, in many ways, continue sharing those those kinds of thoughts that Kieran and Sinead and Leontia and everybody else has advised me how to do things. I mean, I guess the other thing that that I think is important is that it's not strictly just the university. It is people who attend there. It's the people that we are very fortunate to have and to get along with. But when I think of other, it's not that I can't think of Queen's and where it is in Belfast without thinking of other places. But there are loads of pressures, and Belfast isn't. It's a big enough city. It's not a gigantic city. For now, as far as we know, it's one of the less expensive cities in Ireland to live in. Dublin, Cork, Galway. It is more manageable in that way, and I really think that has a big impact on. It does have a big impact on how you experience the city. But when it means that you can live somewhere comparatively more cheaply than Dublin, say, and you can go and have the actual class in the pub and stuff, and just that a lot of these other costs tend to be more manageable. That's kind of a welcoming thing. Like it's one isn't under the same kinds of pressures. There are considerable economic pressures on everyone, and again, who knows what's going to happen as future relationships nationally and internationally are worked out. But for now, it seems like a pleasant place to live with those things too. So you not only do you have a great community of people there, but you can actually go and hang out with them and talk to them. Pandemics excluded and all that, but. Yeah, so those things matter. Those things help, I think.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I live in Dublin, so we don't have that sense of anywhere being cheap ever. So that does sound very appealing. Okay, I think that we should probably wrap this up now. Not that it was great to talk to you all, and I feel like I would happily talk to you for the rest of the evening, but I think we should cut it off. So I'd like to just thank you again so much for coming and talking and reading, and it's been brilliant to hear from you. And thanks to everyone who's watching the event and who has joined in before or is joining in for the first time. It's great to have you here. So we hope to hold further installments of the Poetry in the Lexicon series in the coming months. And well, good night for now. And to Manuela, Padraig and Stephen, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosamund. Farewell.
Bye.
Bye.